feature presentation.
DW, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. I love your collection behind you. It looks amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And doing some research, I found out that you were a big fan of renting movies at Blockbusters in the 90s and 2000s and would go there every Friday night. And I wanted maybe just start there with your love of finding film, and
Totally.
and being sort of immersed in, the video store aisles. Were there specific films that you found, in your sort of journey through the aisles that really spoke to you both as a filmmaker and as a musician?
Absolutely. I mean, that was my favorite thing to do, obviously, Friday night. But there were so many different aisles. Obviously, you go to the blockbusters, what's the new releases? That's always exciting. But they all also had like a festival, like an indie film festival section of what was winning awards. So I would always do like one blockbuster and then like one kind of like indie film. And I saw some crazy shit. I don't know how my parents would like let me just be like, yeah, sure, get whatever you want. But even like finding cool DVDs in like the $5 discount bins, like that's how I found like Saving Face, which is like it's such an incredible film that like impacted me a lot. Bennett like Beckham, that wasn't on the new release section either, and like that's one of my favorite films ever. So yeah, it was just so cool to also see the artistry of who designs DVDs and like movie posters, which I feel like is such an art that goes kind of unrepresented in this industry, that it's like, I don't know, physical form, man. I miss it. Although I do have a very vast VHS collection.
There is something beautiful about that art form that goes really unnoticed, especially when you look at a poster or a VHS cover and you feel like, oh, this could be anything, and then you pick it up and you rent it, and sometimes it lets you down because the image is so strong, but then other times it surprises you. Like I think about like David Cronenberg's The Fly, for example, where I remember renting that as a kid, or even Streets of Fire or Fright Night, and then going to the video store or to rent or to pick up CDs based on the albums afterwards. So it's such a powerful thing. Something in this movie that I think a lot of people could take for granted is the Thunder Hawks logo. How important was that to you to develop that and make it as authentic looking as possible?
Oh, it was hugely important to me. I love fonts. I love design. I love graphic design. So for me, I was like, the only way that people are going to buy this is like some cool elite cheer club is if the graphic is cool. And like I named the team. I was like looking around and finding, different kind of things that inspired me. But I was like, okay, Thunderhawks is like thunder, lightning bolts, you're just finding its color schemes. Like I love that stuff. And, it's such a important way to really showcase all these little tiny decisions. They really do add up to in the end it's kind of like quality control.
Absolutely. And the audience can tell, I think, when you're watching this, because you can be taken out of it if the logo or the world that you're in doesn't feel real. And I hope that there's some sort of retro kid collaboration in the future for Thunderhawks, because that would be amazing,
That'd
to
be
think
I
about.
love retro kid. That'd be so cool. I would love
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah, just thinking about like what they've done with Video at Arcade, or even the North American House Hippo, things like that. So it's
So
it's
good.
all, yeah, it's amazing stuff. And watching the movie, like those little details, like even the opening credits for this film, I wanted to ask you about them because they did evoke a feeling of almost like watching sort of the Mighty Ducks or something like that, in a way where you're thinking about those 90s sports movies that kind of had a comeback at that point. Was that something that was intentional, and playing with the fonts, were you kind of interested in sort of looking at that?
I just want to say that I love that you're talking to me about fonts because it's the one thing that I talk all the time about that nobody cares about at all.
Oh, I love it.
But yeah, that backspot kind of graphic, I was really inspired by Baywatch font. I like watched Baywatch growing up. I was obsessed with Baywatch. Baywatch doesn't get enough credit. Like if you look at the fashion, some of those like sunset shots, it's beautiful. They shot it on film. Come on. But the graphics, the music, they were so great at montages, visual storytelling. Baywatch holds it all for me. And I feel like I learned so much from that. So kind of going back to my roots. And I was like, okay, Baywatch font, that's going to feel 90s, but let's elevate it and bring that in. And just also having a credit sequence that warms up the audience, kind of like a warm-up DJ. You know, you got to warm up the crowd, you got to hype them up. And then I knew also writing that music track that kind of is in that beginning sequence, I knew that I wanted to kind of hit that drop and then hit that audience with, this is the perspective of a cheerleader. Because we all don't have that perspective. I've never flipped like that in my life. I remember putting the GoPro helmet that we kind of built a contraption and we put it on one of the cheerleaders for the first time. And when we were watching back that footage, we were like, holy shit. Even the cheerleader was like, oh, I don't even remember that extra flip. They're like, I actually think I flip with my eyes closed. And I was like, what? Like, that you're seeing this perspective for the first time too? It was wild. So for me, you know, you really only have, similar to a DJ, you only have like 5 minutes to grab an audience. So I knew great font, high impact music, coming in with that kind of POV style. I was like, I want people to feel like hype and amped to watch this movie. And yeah, I think people really lean in.
You do. You feel that visceral quality of both like the excitement of doing something like that, but the astonishment of how athletic it is and the physicality of it all. There's something about that I also wanted to ask you. Do you look at a sequence like that as both a director and an editor while you're shooting it? Because I feel like, you're someone who has multiple sort of hats that you wear, both as a filmmaker and as a musician. And so does that sort of coincide together when you're working?
Oh, totally. I'm kind of like editing in my head when I'm on set, knowing what I need to get, knowing if we don't have it, knowing how things are going to cut together in post. And then also, there are certain tracks or music, syncs that I wanted, or I was like writing some of the music as I was shooting, or I had, finished some of it before. It's all, one big brew in my brain that I'm like brewing, and all these things are kind of bubbling and coming together. And then, in the edit, I'm finally able to kind of put everything together.
Does that also include sound? Because I was completely captivated by, you mentioned the opening scene, the mats and the boards and the way that that sound kind of hits within the sequence that you're presenting.
Totally. I love sound design. I feel like it's an element that's not people don't play with it enough. I feel like when directors kind of hit their debut feature, there's so much pressure and focus on the shoot, getting the footage, getting the actors, going to the location. And sometimes people get lost in post-production, especially when it comes to sound design. It's like, yeah, okay, make the dialogue sound clean and put in a song. But for me, I'm like, I want things to be, cinematic. And from the very beginning, even in the script, I'm just like, what's going to be the piece that kind of goes along with this anxiety? And I knew that that was going to be a part of the score. I knew, I named it Thunderhawks because I wanted the Prodigy's song Thunder, but I also wanted to put thunder in the score and the rumbling of thunder for every time she had anxiety. So it's all kind of just like piecing these things together. And when it came to, the gymnast hitting the mats or like, getting kicked in the face, they don't have that in a sound library. They don't have cheerleading sound effects in a cheer library. So I was so fortunate to work with Red Lab, who is incredible, and me, and they're kind of like sound guy. I'm like, are you down for a field trip? I was like, I got some cheerleaders in a gym and I want to go get those sounds so they're authentic. We're not, combining like a whoopee cushion with a car slam door to get like what we think the sound is. But we spent a day just kind of like getting hits in the floor mat and like what it sounds like for a flyer to land in a backspot's arms. Like for me, all of these details are so important and so important to like the story, because again, like bad sound is when you notice it and great sound is when you're just experiencing the movie. And so I wanted to get to that place with this.
Did you have any specific sounds in mind for emotions and that collaboration process with your composer? Was that something you were thinking about? Because the anxiety in this movie that you feel is so internalized that it feels like it's coming out of Riley and not just simply something that's being composed for the film.
Yeah, I mean, I was working with KCMQ, who's incredible, and we've known each other for quite some time. And it is a balance. When you're creating score, you don't want to overwhelm what the actor has already done. You want to kind of get underneath it and lift it up, because my kind of, what I tried to do as a director, I don't want people to watch the movie and be like, oh, there's Devery Jacobs acting. I want people to be like, oh my God, like I'm feeling these things that Riley's feeling. I want the audience to be in on the journey of Riley as well. And obviously the score is so important. So just bringing like subwoofer wobbles, I know that I knew wanted to bring that. I want to play with subs a lot, rumbling, the textures of running on the mat. We kind of like would take that sound and then we cut out all the high end and kind of like bury that into the anxiety. And then playing around in electronic music. Like I'm an electronic music producer. KCMQ is as well. So playing with like uncomfortable, distorted textures and synths, things that kind of almost want to make your skin crawl a little bit. And just kind of once you put that all into one package and you put it under, Devery's incredible performance, you start to hit the audience with what Riley's feeling, the audience starts to feel too.
Absolutely. And one scene I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is the scene. It's just a little moment, but it feels like there's so much going on in the sequence. And it's when Riley is sitting waiting to see if she's made the team. And it's just that moment where I think a lot of people can relate to that, whether it's for a job interview or doing an interview like this. And you're kind of sitting there waiting and you're thinking about so much and the pressure on yourself and thinking about where you're going to be next. And having that validation, I think, really comes through in that scene. Can you talk about working with Devery Jacobs on that moment and how intimate it was?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I feel like we've all experienced things like that where there's like an anticipation. And I think we all kind of connect to things where our brains just spiral. We all have experiences with anxiety and you can't stop it. The train has left the station and you're thinking worst case scenario and you're just kind of falling down this hole and you kind of don't even realize your breathing has stopped or becomes irregular, and then your heart starts to race and then you're like, oh my God, something's wrong with me, and it's like a snowball kind of rolling down a hill. So working with Devery is just kind of knowing where we wanted Riley to start and where we wanted her to get to, and then getting really close. An actor's face, that's going to convey so much more than me being in a medium or a wide. I really wanted to get up in there and really even get with the breaths again, sound design, right? Like bringing those breaths in. And then it comes to that moment where the door opens and we're right out of it. We're snapped right out of it. And she has to go back to, pretend to act normal. Okay, it's happening. I gotta get in there.
Well, there's a fight or flight aspect to it, or like you feel like, okay, now you have to just do it because you're committed to it. But that moment where you're waiting for it to happen, there are so many things that you begin to question and you doubt, and that's where that anxiety plays so strongly, and especially in your direction of that scene. It's so well done. Something I'm really curious about, because you were talking about it earlier. Do you see yourself as a visual filmmaker first, and does the writing process, is that something that you would rather collaborate on? Because I know with this script you worked with Joanna Sarazin, and I was curious about that collaboration process.
Yeah, I definitely am a visual person. I'm a visual director. I definitely have the story and the skeleton of the story, what I wanted to explore, the journey of Riley kind of like arced out. But I'm like, why would I lock myself in a room by myself and be tortured alone trying to figure this out when there's so many talented writers? And so I was so fortunate enough to work with Joanne Sarazin, who was really able to kind of take that shape and then kind of bring it to life and bring things to life that I hadn't even considered, with like some of the mother relationship or the coach relationship. And so I know a script's really getting to a good place when I'm just like fully visualizing scenes. I'm reading a scene and my brain's like, okay, like I want to start somewhere wide, or like, oh, here's an opportunity for a cool oneer, or how am I going to shoot anxiety? That's going to be a theme throughout. So yeah, I love to collaborate in general, but definitely love to collaborate with writers.
Was one of the conversations that you had, because there's something that's in this movie that I think is really important, is that you look at cheerleading as not just simply aesthetic, it's athletic, it's a form of, it's a sport. And so that conversation comes up in this kind of sleepover situation. Was that something that you and Joanna talked about in terms of that dialogue being an important moment?
Yes, Joanne definitely brought that to the table, and it was our only opportunity to have any sort of commentary on the sport. We wanted to bring up also like body inclusivity, and obviously, cheerleaders who are a little bit thinner, there's priority, which is ridiculous because they're just as athletic as, cheerleaders who are maybe larger in size. And so we knew we wanted to touch on that, but our whole film's not about that. But we knew we wanted to give it its moment, especially, breaking down that there is such a male gaze to this sport. It's super feminine and it's very pretty and sparkly. Even when pitching this film and telling people, oh, I'm like breaking a cheer movie, people just go to Bring It On. People just
Yes.
go to like silly, pretty sparkles. And, I was brushed aside just probably as cheerleaders are brushed aside when they tell, other athletes, oh, I'm a cheerleader. And they're like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, no, they're the real fucking deal. They are throwing bodies in the air. The concussion rates are crazy. I've seen multiple girls get concussions just from like, going to practices and watching what their world is like. I've seen broken arms. I've seen girls who get concussions instantly in the middle of a competition and then throwing up right on the floor. And the crazy part is the competitions know that's going to happen because they have people on standby with garbage cans who run in and clean it up within a minute. And I'm like, this is wild that we are putting children into these situations. But the crazier part about it, maybe being a more female presenting sport, is you're required to smile and act like it never happened, which is not required from a hockey player or a football player or a baseball player. If they fuck up, or if they're injured, we know they expel their anger or whatever. But for cheerleaders, they have to put a smile right back on their face and pretend like it never happened, which for me is way more pressure, which again, something I wanted to kind of explore in this film.
Well, absolutely. Like the quality of what Evan Rachel Wood is talking about, making it effortless, and that demand, and what you just mentioned, where there's this double-edged sword where it's like men can get away with so much, even in just being, cantankerous or angry or upset. But there's this double standard for women and non-binary people where it's like you have to be the best and also never complain about anything, and you feel that frustration, but it's never the conflict of the story. Like the conflict there in your film, which I really loved, and you've talked about this in other interviews, is going all the way and pushing yourself to those extremes. And I wanted to talk about sort of finding that balance between the physical pain and the psychological. Was that something that you were really making sure that that was important to the storytelling? Because obviously we see the blisters and the bruises and the blood, but talking about Riley's emotional state and mental health as the film goes on, that's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also something that even I learned from the movie is athletes, it's not just physical. It's not just how great physical shape you're in, which will lead to positive results. It is your mental health. If you're not in a good place, or like, what pressure can do to you if you're a star player, what that kind of adds to the conversation. And there's just such a lack of conversation of mental health in sports. I feel like it's starting now. I feel like the doors are definitely opening, but it's in like the pro world. But there's athletes before pros, in high school. And not only are you feeling pressure from sports, from your coach, from needing to hit perfection, but you're also a teenager.
Yeah.
Everything's overwhelming. Everything's happening to you for the first time. And you're just kind of like freaking out. So I'm like, to be that age and to have that kind of responsibility on you, I'm just like, oh my God, what a pressure cooker.
Did you feel the pressure of putting together a production? I'm astonished that this was only 17 days of shooting. Like
Yes.
I don't even know how you pulled this off and made it so amazingly succinct, but also visceral in its quality. Does that pressure, do you ever feel that? But also specifically, I was curious about sort of where your approach comes from, because it's something where like it feels like it's organic and of the moment and of the character. But are you somebody that likes to storyboard and have everything thought out as it's about to go into production?
Absolutely. I spent 2 weeks on my shot list. I really kind of go through the entire script and really visualize everything, what I want to do, what I want to accomplish. And then I go back over everything to be like, is there any way where I can make this more specific, more stylized? What do I want the audience to feel here? How can I better use the tool of the camera to make the audience feel what I want them to feel? And so knowing I have this kind of master list, I have like QR codes all over it linking to shot deck and other shots from other films, or like cool motions. It'll link to like a YouTube video of like something I want to accomplish. So it's all there. So I set myself up for success, hopefully. And then, I get to set, and it's kind of like, it's almost like an actor's approach. You learn your lines, you do all the homework, and then you get to set and you're like, you kind of let go a little bit. And I have it as a guide. But yeah, if a cool shot kind of appears to me and we have the time, I want to go get that. Or I realize, oh, this shot's actually not gonna really highlight the incredible performance I'm watching. All I need is simplicity and just to get in close, then that's the direction I'm gonna follow.
Was there a moment on set that was spontaneous for you that was, a shot that was like just presented itself while you were filming that you felt like, oh, this was something I wasn't expecting, or maybe even better than what I thought it could have been?
Yeah, I think shooting some of the montage bits, it was to the point where, because we were just kind of picking up that montage. I knew I wanted to be like a beefy montage because I love montages in film.
Who
Uh,
doesn't?
I know, I miss them, and then people do montages, but they're kind of not there because people are talking. I'm like, no, visual storytelling, But yeah, I think I would look to the cheerleaders being like, okay, like what part of your body do you feel good about and love and would want to show off? And they'd be like, oh, my arms are so strong. And I was like, what's a move you could do that would make your arms like look really great? They're like, oh, when I do this like crazy thing. And so then I'd be like, okay, let's find a really cool way to highlight that. Or I think like one of the flyers was like, what if you put your little camera right under me, and so we get that perspective of the cheerleader going up and right back down, and we had like kind of like a little drone camera that was small enough, and so we're like, okay, let's get it, and that ended up in the film. So just kind of like looking to the cheerleaders to be like, give me, allow me access, into your world and what you think looks good, and they were just like popping off with ideas.
Was that access something that was easy to sort of attain, or was that something that you had to build those relationships up with the cast and the people that you were working with?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working with Cheer Fusion, which is like a Brampton all-star squad, for 6 years. We did a proof of concept with them, and we just loved working together. And then as we started writing the script, they're like, well, come hang out at practice, come to a competition with us. And so I kind of knew some of the girls already, kind of leading into shooting. But the most important thing for me is to create a safe space on set, to make sure people feel good. I'm not looking to, nobody needs to be traumatized while making a movie. And on top of that, when people are happy, they do better work. They do
Yes.
better work, and it comes out in the film. The film is better for it. So it's like, why would I want stress and negativity to be there? So I work very hard to make sure I have the right, leaders on set who can set a positive, professional, safe environment for everybody, making sure there's a lot of queer people and indigenous people, Black people on my set, so we can be a community and we can tell a story together that hopefully has a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I know Sarah Pauly was talking about this with Women Talking, where there's this strange romanticization of, putting a production and people in jeopardy in order to create great art. You think about like Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, and the Heart of Darkness documentary that kind of illustrates that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the film is going to be good, or you put someone in danger in order to get a shot. That's not worth it. So hearing that, I think, is really important, especially with the physical aspect of the story that you're telling. I think that that's really key for something like this.
Yeah, and also young people. How many, look at child actors.
Yes.
That there's absolutely no need. I feel like there is an extra responsibility if you are someone in a power position and you have like young people on your set and you're telling a young people story, you have to be extra gentle and listening and walking them through these things because they may not even understand what they're saying yes to. There's an extra responsibility to make sure they're good and they're okay and they feel safe and that they're walking away with a positive experience.
Now, you talked about montages, and obviously a lot of people think about, the sports movie going hand in hand with the montage, especially because of the Rocky films and, Stallone taking over and directing 2 through 5. And so there's a quality of that where like people are familiar with it. But in your opinion, what makes a great montage?
A great montage, there is a visual story happening. It can't just be a series of cool shots. There has to be a visual story. And by visual story, I mean like, I don't know, something is moving from left to right frame, and then the next shot, it starts on the right frame and then brings it to center. Like there has to be visual like shapes that are connecting to one another and in conjunction with the music that you're
Yes.
kind of like building that all up so it's going up together and then it's coming down together. So yeah, that's how I would say like is a great montage, which is very abstract, but it's kind of like you know it when you feel it. If you're not feeling it, it's not working.
Do you see it as a music video at all? Because I remember with going back to the Rocky movies, I know for Rocky 4, there's a whole sequence that is scored to No Easy Way Out by Robert Tepper, and it basically plays like a music video of the whole franchise.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, being a musician and also directing a bunch of music videos, that's definitely something I pull from. And in music videos, the stakes aren't as high. You can play with cool shots, you can try out different lenses, and you can like play with all of those things. And I've pulled a lot of, what works in Backspot from those music videos.
Absolutely. I have only about 2 minutes left, and there's so much more I would love to talk to you about, but there's something specific that I found really interesting about this movie, and I've been very critical about Cineplex over the years, especially with how they project their films and they don't use proper masking and things like that. And I was curious, what is the best movie-going experience for you? And especially with Backspot opening theatrically on May 31st, is there a way that people should see this film? And like, especially for exhibitors, is there a way that exhibitors should project the film?
I mean, they should project the film well.
Yes.
I completely agree with you. I feel like, having Cineplex in the film was more kind of like a nostalgic moment of my experiences being a teenager and going to Cineplex and not knowing all of the other things and the technical things that now as a filmmaker, I'm like, the image isn't bright enough and it needs to be louder. But yeah, I definitely feel like a bright, crisp image is super important. And also subs. Guys, we need subwoofers. Like turn the music up. I just saw Fall Guy in theaters and it was low. And
Yeah.
I was like, turn it up until someone complains that it's too loud. Like that's my opinion because at home, a lot of people live in apartments or like can't be loud in their communities, or for neighbors' sake. And it's like we should be going to the cinema because we want that full surround sound aspect and to physically feel the vibrations of being in a club scene or hearing somebody hit a mat really hard. So yeah, I love like a good AVX IMAX experience, but for me it's all about the subs.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think people are becoming more aware of now, especially in the post-pandemic where, you can get an amazing experience at home, but the communal aspect is important. But obviously when you watch a movie like this, you mentioned, the sound design in this film is so well done. And unfortunately, not every movie theater can be the light box. And that's something where like I feel, it's not just Cineplex, but Cineplex has such a monopoly over the theatrical experience that it doesn't give any room for anybody else. So I appreciate you talking about that and talking to me about this film and sharing your thoughts on filmmaking. And this has been just a really lovely experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat.